Affairs and Professor of Counselor Education at North Carolina State University, a Research One university with over 27,000 undergraduate and graduate students. At North Carolina State, he is responsible for the development and implementation of a comprehensive vision for undergraduate education. He supports teaching excellence and faculty development initiatives that promote classroom enhancements and positive educational outcomes, and is currently working with faculty groups at North Carolina State to institutionalize a model of curricular transformation and diversification. Dr. Anderson, who holds a BA degree in psychology from Villanova University and a PhD in psychology from Cornell University, is an important voice in education. He has held both the American Council on Education and Danforth Fellowships and has presented seminars and workshops at over 200 conferences, colleges, and universities. His expertise on topics such as student success and enhancing faculty instructional competency, facilitating student learning styles/strategies, the infusion of diversity throughout the curriculum and the institution, and the assessment of teaching and learning outcomes is without question. Beyond his work at North Carolina State, he is working with other 2-year and 4-year institutions on the development of a student-centered, quality-driven, outcomes-based model of student learning and success. Let me just add to what I have on the paper here that Dr. Anderson and I have been involved with the Compact for Faculty Diversity, which is co-sponsored by the Southern Region Educational Board, the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education, and the New England Commission on Higher Education for the last 3 or 4 years. And in that setting, I've had the opportunity to observe him present each year at that organization's conference, typically for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I've always been a bit frustrated at the end of those presentations, not because of the quality of his presentation, but because of the fact that I've always wanted to hear more. He's only had time to touch upon his tremendous wealth of knowledge in a number of areas. And so I thought, after hearing him the first time, that it would be a good idea to bring him here to spend a day with us to talk about some of the things that he only has an opportunity to touch upon very briefly at the Compact for Faculty Diversity. I'm sure that you will appreciate what he has to share with us today. The title of Dr. Anderson's presentation is Developing an Institutional Model for Student Success. Please offer a warm welcome to Dr. James A. Anderson.
Thank you very much, Kofi. Joyce, also thank you, and Doris, for your opening comments. It's a pleasure to be here. New York is a great place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live here. Too cold, too much traffic, etc. But I almost did. I just wanted to share this with you. Last year, I was one of the 2 finalists for the presidency at New York City Tech. And I thought that it would be very appropriate for me to take my skills, my commitments, etc., to an institution, first of all, that had a significant percentage of students of color, that was extremely diverse, but that I also thought had the potential to be a cutting-edge institution in the CUNY system in New York and in the country. And so I was almost a neighbor of yours. At the last minute, I was the choice of the search committee, but at the last minute, I pulled out just because some things didn't work out. Throughout the course of this day, for those of you that I interact with, you will continually hear me make reference to the term a model of this, a model of that. And let me tell you why I emphasize models as opposed to individual programs or individual activities. Models usually emphasize 3 things. First of all, models are based upon something that's systematic. They're based upon plans. They're based upon benchmarks. They're based upon looking around the country and seeing who does the best job at what. You know, you can pick almost any area related to teaching, student success, retention, academic support, etc. And there's an institution in the country that has a population exactly like yours that is doing a tremendous job. All right? And a lot of times when institutions, administrators and faculty at that institution that I visit whine about the quality of the student that comes and whine about the amount of the work ethic, etc. I said, well, you know, right over there in Arizona, there's a program at this institution that has students just like yours, and they're kicking butt. So I need you to tell me the difference. Well, first of all, they usually don't even know about that program. Okay? So systematic is key, that what we do is based upon research, best practices, etc. Second thing, that a model is comprehensive. Okay? A model usually pulls together the various areas of what occurs on a campus. So for example, at NC State, where we have 18,000 undergrads, it's my responsibility to make sure that the investment of resources in what we do, whether it be academic support, faculty development, tutorial services, it doesn't matter, assessment office, that everything that we do connects to each other so that the left hand is not undermining the effort of the right hand. Okay? It's very important. So I know that the budget decisions that I make are usually going to end up in a successful outcome because of the linkages throughout the model. And then the third piece, besides being systematic and comprehensive, we need to make sure that our efforts tend to be sequential. That is, that from the first point of contact that we make with the student, that all of the things that that student begins to experience. Let's say you have a student, a returning adult, been out of school a long time, comes here and starts off in developmental courses. When a student starts off in developmental courses, you want to make sure that their first sets of experiences after the developmental course reflect what happened in the developmental course. What you don't want, and this is always the graphic analogy I use, is you don't want someone to have been in a set of developmental courses and then the first general curriculum course they take in math, they take from the scourge of mathematics. That is, someone who does not understand what even occurred in developmental math, who is not a student-centered instructor, but who is a content-centered instructor, who has a history of high failure rates, etc. In just a short period of time, that person will undermine everything that happened in developmental math. Okay? So what we do has to be systematic, comprehensive, and sequential. That is, we build upon the efforts. If you're genuinely going to have writing across the curriculum here at my institution or any institution, that means as students move in and out of different courses and different academic experiences, we're going to emphasize some of the same kinds of things in all of the areas. Okay, so as we introduce students to writing, we introduce them to the mechanics of writing, but our ultimate goal is to have them write to think. And so all their experiences begin to move them from the mechanics of writing to critical thinking, whereas writing becomes a facilitative aspect of critical thinking. And there's a plan behind it. They're not going to run into people and into courses where they're doing something just totally disparate from the plan. Okay, and again, that makes it a model. So I'm going to show you some overheads throughout and talk about this model both this morning, and then we have a separate section on teaching where I'll focus a lot on how teaching reflects the model, and then later on today, academic supports. I can project without standing at the mic, but do I have to stand at the mic for it to be on the videotape? Doesn't matter, because I can put the overhead on and walk back to the mic if you want. Okay. Let me give you an example of what I mean when I initially talk about a model. The various things that we focus on at our institutions, there are stages of development of models. So we can talk about any model in any institution. We probably need to collect good data about what we do, both at the entry level, later on in terms of learning outcomes, teaching outcomes, other kinds of program outcomes. It's very important that assessment be a part of what we do. Assessment is important for accountability, assessment is important for decision making, and assessment tells us whether or not what we're doing works. If we're engaged in a programmatic effort, and I'll give you a real good example. When I came to NC State, one of the things I negotiated for was the power in the budget to really make a difference, to change things. And so the first thing I did was review a lot of the academic programs. There was a program there that had been in existence 18 years that serviced students of color that had never produced one piece of paper to show that it worked. It was this anecdote. When I said, how do you know this works? Well, because the students like it. I said, well, that's not enough. How do you know it works? And after a year of systematically analyzing the program, it didn't work at all. All right? And this program was receiving a lot of money. I would have only known that through assessment. Okay? There was really no other way for me to identify that. So as we talk about building an assessment component, there are different aspects to it. What do you want to do at the pre-entry level? What do you want to know about your students in terms of cognitive skills, non-cognitive kinds of areas, etc.? How do you want to use the feedback, and ultimately, how is it going to impact retention? All right, I have 3 committees working right now, all who are involved in different aspects of assessment, who will give me white papers in March that will help me make decisions about what the real impact is on the 4-year graduation rate, on retention, on the 6-year graduation rate, on students who transfer out, etc. One of the fundamental things we are doing, for example, is reviewing every policy and procedure in the institution that impacts undergrads to see whether or not they facilitate or inhibit time to degree. And one of the things we learned is that there's so many policies and procedures in place that nobody had looked at for 3-4 decades that were impeding student progress. Okay. Another aspect of the model is self-esteem. Self-esteem, culture, those aspects of the student's holistic being are real important the more diverse the population. Okay? The more diverse the student population by age, by culture, by race, by class, and then by the most pervasive aspect of diversity, which is diversity of skill level, the more diverse those factors are, the more important something like a self-esteem model occurs. Remember one of the points I made earlier. Look at the best models, best practices, et cetera, in the country. If you look at the top models in the country at community colleges, at 4-year institutions, at public, at private, it doesn't matter. You will find that the most successful models do those 4 things that you see up there. They meet students at their individual level of self-esteem. And when students come to you and come to us, they have their individual personal self-esteem, they have a sense of academic self-esteem, they have a sense of efficacy, whether or not they can do work or not do work, etc. All the good models take students from that point and merge them together with other students and gradually give them a sense of collective identity. That is, that they will succeed or fail as a group. One of the reasons that's important is because you move students from the fear of individual failure or the anxiety of individual failure, and now you diffuse that anxiety across a group, that the group succeeds and fails. Okay? That then gets connected to, as you see, academic excellence, which then ultimately ties into academic performance. All of the top models in the country do that. We're students of color, we're returning adults, where diverse populations have been highly successful. Give you an example. Up at Tacoma Community College in Tacoma, Washington, there's a math model only for returning adults who identify themselves as having math anxiety. And the math course is called Math for Math Haters. Okay, and the only folks in the course are returning adults with a high degree of math anxiety. And they have a systematic process that they use to, first of all, diffuse the anxiety and then gradually introduce them to the mechanics of math. The first day of class, they don't just bombard them with the mechanics of math. They do things to begin to develop that collective identity. Highly successful model. Okay. Another aspect of the model is the cultural adjustment component. Not culture in the sense of how we might think about it, different culture and ethnic groups, but the fact that college is a culture, and that a returning adult or a new freshman, et cetera, that doesn't know anything about this culture doesn't know how to negotiate it. Okay, a lot of times faculty say, wow, if a student has done so poorly throughout the semester, why didn't they go get tutoring? Because they don't understand that aspect of the culture. We do. Okay. Well, if a student's done poorly, why didn't they come and see me? Because perhaps in their experiences, approaching an authority figure like you or I is something they normally wouldn't do. So the cultural adjustment model says there's a process students go through, okay? There's a first stage, which is physical arrival. That only lasts 2 or 3 weeks, where they begin to negotiate what's happening on campus. Then they move into a stage of psychological arrival. Then they move into a stage of ambivalence, where they're really now beginning to question their skills. They're really beginning to say, I don't understand this culture. They're not maybe getting the kind of success they want, etc. It's usually at that point that students stop out, drop out, and withdraw. It's pretty clear it's a stage of ambivalence. All right? What we have to do is create the model, the program, the activities to intercept that before they even get there. Right. And then another last part of it is advising, counseling, etc. Every institution advises, every institution counsels, every institution tutors. I've been to 254 institutions of every type, and only maybe 10% are doing it right. Okay? And I'm going to talk more about that in the afternoon session when I talk about academic supports. But just briefly, if you have a tutoring model, or an advising model, you can't have every tutor or advisor do it their own way. There has to be some systematic emphasis on how you choose to do it. Okay, we use SI a lot, Supplemental Instruction, which is based on the model that comes out of the University of Missouri at Kansas City. And in our SI model, the SI instructor works with small groups and only instructs 20% of the time. 80% of the time, the SI instructor teaches the students how to engage in successful collaborative working groups for whatever the course is. So it's a 20-80. And actually, we've manipulated the percentages over the years to identify which percentage will give the greatest yield. Students who take SI 12 hours or more a semester invariably will get an A or B in any course they're in. If they're in a course, and we offer it for all math and science courses, since they're going to be the toughest ones, or technical abstract courses. If they take the course, go to class, have a study group, and go to SI, only 12 hours a semester, over 90% get A's or B's in that course. Okay? And so we've documented the data to show that. We show that students who go 3 hours or less have the highest percentage of C's, D's, and F's in those courses. All right? And the SI is tied directly to teaching. All SI instructors must go to lecture, every lecture. All SI instructors must connect their tutoring to the instruction. Most institutions hire tutors, a student who is really a history major, but they happen to get a B in math, and they become a math tutor. Well, that student is going to tutor in math by his or her preferred learning style. And if his or her preferred learning style is different from that of the tutee, that's too bad. See, that's a dysfunctional model that I've just described to you, where we have poor matches between tutors and tutees. Okay? You need to make sure in a systematic model that we have a plan, that there's some common objectives, etc. There are a lot of ways that we can talk about teaching and aspects of a teaching model. One of the first things to think about is, what is it that we want to accomplish when we talk about teaching? Okay, effective teaching, good teaching, teaching for this, teaching for that. Well, all of us are teaching for retention and student success. Across institutional type, teaching for retention and student success is what we are paid to do. But we have to define what that means. For example, teaching for retention can mean that besides teaching our content, that we may also at the same time want to impact some cognitive outcome. That is, when I used to teach Intro to Psych, as I taught the content, there were 3 things I told students on the first day of class that we were going to do. I said, look, most of you are taking this psych course as an elective. Therefore, I don't have to try to shove Freud down your throat, because in your junior year, you'll be into your major, and Freud really won't matter if you're a business major. But here's what I can do for you. As I teach the content of psychology, I can also show you how to be a better questioner and prober, how to ask good questions in class, how when you get in your study group to ask questions among one another. As I teach you the content of psychology, I can show you how to become a better thinker. That is, as you organize your notes to study, as you listen to my lecture, you can put it into thinking schemes that will help you package information better. And then the third thing I said was, as I cover the content of psychology. I'll show you how to become a better writer. Half of our psych department, we convinced each other to focus on those three things as we taught. See, we had cognitive outcomes. We had skill-related outcomes over and above the content. Okay, one of the greatest myths or fallacies among faculty around the country is if I do all that stuff, I can't teach all my content. Go to the best research on effective teaching. You know what it says? What separates effective instructors from even good instructors, what separates excellent instructors from poor instructors, is that as they teach their content, they also have the ability to introduce students to other types of outcomes and skills. Research has said it for 30 years, all right? But the illusion is that if I don't just teach content all the time, I can't do these other things. Think about it, folks. If students begin to develop these other skills, better thinking, better writing, better questioning and probing, their learning curve speeds up. They pick information up faster. They don't waste time asking questions that can't really get them the answers they want. Okay? Teaching with support services. What's the relationship of the support services here at my institution, at City, other city, university institutions? What's the relationship of the support services to teaching? Okay, I just told you, I have a strong body of data that shows there's an absolute direct connection between SI, Supplemental Instruction on our campus, higher grades, and the type of teaching that goes on in the class. In fact, faculty evaluations in SI courses are significantly higher than faculty evaluations in courses where SI is not present. See, there's a halo effect. Students have the SI, they get the better grade. It must be connected to this instruction, all right? And that's exactly what I want to know. I don't want to know the opposite. So, is there some relationship? Is there a relationship to the centers that you have, a learning center, a writing center, a first-year experience program, etc.? I put Prince George's Community College down there because of the 250-some institutions I visited. There are only a handful where I found a direct connection between the developmental courses and what the general faculty do. Only a handful. And so at Prince George's Community College, faculty who will teach the first sets of general curriculum courses, intro to psych, intro to history, intro to this, the early math courses, they work with faculty in the developmental courses so they know exactly what they're doing. So when students leave the developmental courses, move into their first set of general curriculum courses, there's a matchup of what occurs. That's not profound. That's not deep philosophical PhD stuff. That's common sense. Common sense says that we're going to create a sequential link among the things that we do. So if you have students in developmental courses, if you have students in tutoring, if you have students in something else, then we're going to make sure that as we engage them early with faculty, that what those faculty do in the sets of general curriculum courses emphasizes what they were building their strengths on. Then, when they become skilled enough, confident enough, they can actually move into tough courses where you may have different approaches that don't emphasize what was done early, but now they're confident enough and strong enough to negotiate those things. Right? That's what a model does. This is one of my favorites, because it really tells us a lot about how we do business. Look in the middle there, where it says course selection, choosing a major or choosing an area. I was up at a community college in Michigan a couple years ago, 2 years ago. And it's a large community college. It has about 18,000 students at this community college. I won't name it, but it's in the capital city of Michigan. And I asked them, I said, you know, when a student walks in the door, one of these returning adults walk in the door and say they want to go to college, tell me what you do. Just walk me through the process. They said, well, we have them come in and they meet one of the counselors, and the counselor sits there, and the counselor gives them a sheet. And on this sheet are listed all of the potential areas that they could concentrate on while they're here. And I said, let me see the sheet. They showed me the sheet. I'm looking down the sheet. There's nursing, there's respiratory therapy. I said, so a student could come in here and check off nursing, check off respiratory therapy, etc. Then what happens? They said, then we assign them a set of courses. I said, so this person can be reading at the 7th grade level, have no concept of the culture of college, have no concept about the kind of skills that they need to be successful in college, but because they checked off nursing, The first sets of courses that they're going to get are going to be the tough nursing curriculum where you have to be highly skilled in terms of science and math and higher order thinking. They said, yeah. I said, this person who I just described, who's reading at the 7th grade level, has a 100% chance of flunking everything they take. I said, could you explain to me where you got this model from? I said, this is the most dysfunctional thing I've ever heard. That was their entry-level advising model. What the student checked off dictated what would happen in the first semester. Now here's where this becomes even more odious. We got people paying money. People, here's our philosophy at NC State. People pay us money to produce the optimal outcome for them. Not to put them in a situation that maximizes failure. All right? Not to do that. Therefore, when we meet students, we have to have a lot of information to go on. See, what should dictate choice of major, choice of area of concentration, course selection, are the box on the left that says, who are you now, and the box on the right that says, what are you trying to become? If you look at those boxes, if you can't read it, I'll read it. Under who are you now, it's like, what are your interests? What are your developmental needs? What are your learning skills? What's your preparation? What's your background knowledge? You only find that out through assessment. Okay? That's the only way you find that out. Who are you trying to become? What are your curiosities? What are your goals? What is your skill knowledge? What are your attributes, etc.? You only find that out through assessment. Okay? It is a moral sin. I'm going to be Catholic here, because I am Catholic. It's a moral sin to put students who are ill-equipped in courses or in academic settings where they're not ready to do the work. Okay? We're just taking their money. And at this same institution, I said to them, so when the student flunks these courses, do you let them take them again? They said, oh, sure. They said, in fact, they highlighted this particular math course where students of color, on the average, failed it 3 to 4 times, with no intervention between each time they took it. I said, and you take their money every time, don't you? And they said, yeah. I said, you've now moved from being dysfunctional to being unethical, because that's what it borders on when we do things like that. Okay? We have enough models. We have enough best practices. Okay? We have enough benchmarks. We have the best research available on student success, on retention, on good teaching, on diversity, etc. There's no need for us to operate by dysfunctional models. For almost every population that goes to college now, there is a model that indicates success for us. It tells us what to do in terms of classroom teaching, tells us what to do in terms of our academic supports, etc. It tells us how to do good assessment. This is for you, Doris. Let's say we identify goals. And I pick some goals that all of us have. All institutions have goals like this. For example, goal number 1, students in your program will make a successful academic and social adjustment to Medgar Evers, NC State, LaGuardia Community College. It doesn't matter. See, that's the goal of every 2-year and 4-year institution. Students will make a successful academic and social adjustment. How do you know that happens? If you don't do assessment, how do you know that happens? Do you go by whim or anecdote? Do you say just because a student does poorly academically that they didn't make a good social adjustment? Maybe they made a great social adjustment. Maybe they just have a terrible work ethic. Okay? Maybe they spend an inordinate number of hours studying. They just don't know how to study. Okay? So how do we know that we realize that goal? Second goal, students in your program will be academically successful. You say, oh, that's pretty easy. Let's just look at their GPA. Let's just look at their academic achievement. But look, I literally have put up here all the things that we look at to help us make our decisions. Okay? Students in your program will develop positive attitudes towards learning and increase their commitment and responsibility for their own learning. They become self-directed learners. They become responsible learners. They enhance their work ethic. Something everybody wants. All faculty want that. All institutions want that. That does not occur unless you have a plan for it to occur, especially among students who are at the lower end of the skill levels when they come to us. There must be a viable plan to produce that outcome, and then you can measure it using some of those things, a portfolio, a plan of study. There are existing instruments about the kind of learning environment students say they prefer, etc. All right? Now, the reason I put those up there is because I visit a lot of institutions in which, when I ask them about the kind of outcomes that they say they value, or the ones they're focusing on, when I ask them the second question about how you assess them, I get very little feedback. And then I say, how do you make your decisions? How do you make your budget decisions about what to invest in? I'm not going to invest $300,000 in SI, Supplemental Instruction, unless I know absolutely that it works. It's a waste if it doesn't. That's poor leadership on my part. I have $250,000 of faculty development money every year to give to departments or individual faculty. But I have to know that what they intend to do is going to work. And so every faculty member, every department that send me a proposal must have an assessment component to it. If it doesn't, I don't even read it. If you can't tell me how you're going to measure your effectiveness, I don't even read your proposal. Okay? And I really want it to link up to what happens in your department, what your college goals are, what the university goals are, etc. Okay. Best practice, best research, best models. You know, folks, we don't have to guess at what to do. For example, if you look at some of the top programs in the country that have been successful with students who are very diverse, again, I'm talking diversity, a broad range. Even if they were all the same race, they could be diverse by skill level. Okay. I was out at University of Central Oklahoma. Well, you can imagine that University of Central Oklahoma probably has a very homogeneous white population. Okay. To a great degree it does. There's a small percentage of students of color, many of whom are Native American. But it's homogeneous. So when I go there, I'm not talking so much about diversity of race. I'm talking about diversity of skill level. They lose over 50% of their freshmen at the end of the first year. To which I said to their provost, I said, man, they run me out of NC State if we had data like that. Okay? I wouldn't even have a job if we were losing over 50% of our freshmen in the first year. Okay, we lose about 10 or 11. Okay? And they don't even leave for academic reasons. See, this is where you got to do assessment. When I first got to NC State, we were losing 15% of our freshmen at the end of the first year. 1% left for academic reasons. 14% left because they didn't feel engaged by the institution. They didn't feel valued by the institution. They didn't feel anybody cared about them. But people were walking around that campus thinking 15% left for academic reasons. If you think that, then you're going to make a decision based on a false assumption. 1% left. Okay? If we look at the best research and we say, all right, for the population that comes to Medgar Evers, if we look at the other institutions around the country that have the same population who are highly successful, what are they doing? What kind of things are happening? These are the things that are happening. At the point of introduction, when we meet students, they are required to be part of some entry-level course, seminar, whatever you want to call it, that introduces them to college adjustment, that introduces them to the rigors and expectations of college, that does this, that does that. For us, it's a first-year seminar, a very rigorous first-year seminar that gives the student a reality check about what college is about. Okay? You don't even fool yourself anymore at the end of that semester because now you have a sense. What else do we find? We find those programs use structured peer groups. They show students how to use study groups. They don't let students form their own study groups. You know why? Students who use inappropriate learning styles, students who have one or two learning strategies, and the dominant one will probably be rote memory, students who don't know how to effectively use groups, they find each other and form study groups. The less skilled, inappropriate learning style find each other and form study groups, and it's the blind leading the blind. Well, the other side of it is students who are on the high end, who are highly skilled, analytical learning styles, they don't want those students in their study group, so they're not going to let them in. So the students who come in on the lower end, weaker skilled, don't know what college is about, don't negotiate college, Why should we let them form their own study groups and not know what they're doing? They may be committed. Haven't you had these students that come to you and say, oh, Dr. So-and-so, I don't know why I did so poorly on that exam. I had a study group. We met 2 times a week. We studied 2 or 3 hours at a time. And I look at them and say, I know you did. You just didn't know what you were doing. But that's okay, because it's our responsibility to show you how to use functional study groups. All the top models do that. Problem-solving groups, introducing students to writing and library usage early on, okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look at the bottom. The best models in the country have a faculty development component. A faculty development component that ties teaching and other faculty work into the other aspects of student success, student retention. I have yet to see an institution where students, and I'm not talking about high-end institutions, you know, you students down at Duke are going to do well. You could be the worst teacher in the history of mankind. Students at Duke are going to do okay because they come in on that high end. But I'm talking about students that come to public institutions where you have a wide range of skill levels, et cetera. All the top models have faculty as part of what goes on in the rest of the retention area. I'll give you another aspect of assessment. Let's talk about the limitations students come with. Students that come to NC State come in with a good academic profile, very good academic profile, okay? 1,200 on average SATs. 4.0s, about half of our entering class has 4.0s. Even among the professionals who are part of lifelong learning, etc., they still come in pretty skilled. At the end of the freshman year, 6,000 or 7,000 students will be on academic warning or suspension. 6,000 or 7,000 of these students that came with an academic profile that looked real good. And see, one of the things that the arrogance of institutions like mine is that these students are supposed to be able to do college work. So we're not supposed to do all this other stuff for them, okay? Which is why I have to collect a lot of good assessment data, et cetera, to show them that our students need academic support like any other student. It's real important that we're clear on the limitations that our students have. We know, for example, when students come and we do assessment, when they're weak in math, when they're weak in English, when they have difficulty with reasoning, etc. That's not difficult to assess. There are tons of instruments that can identify for you everything you see under the cognitive category. But listen to this. The research on student success and retention has said for the last 40 years, when students stop out, drop out, and withdraw, they do so primarily for non-cognitive, non-academic reasons. When students stop out, drop out, or withdraw, they do so primarily for non-cognitive, non-academic reasons. Most of the institutions in the country do academic and cognitive assessment, which accounts for about 15% of the explanation of why students leave. The other 85% of the explanation of the variance is accounted for by non-cognitive, non-academic things. Most institutions are doing cognitive academic assessment and very little of that. See, that's why they don't know what's going on. When we looked at, let me go back to something I said to you earlier, just to give you an example. When we looked at the impact of supplemental instruction or group tutoring on student success in a course, and we found out that if students go 12 hours or more, they'll get an A or B in the beginning biology course, let's say. Students who go 3 hours or less get C's, D's, and F's. In that category was a high proportion of students of color, African American, Native American, Hispanic. So we said, maybe they have a different academic profile from the success group up here. We looked at the academic profiles of the groups, exactly the same. So that couldn't explain it. We looked at a couple other things. And then it hit me. I said, you know, it's got to be a non-cognitive explanation. There's some psychological, there's something going on that we're not accounting for. You know what we found out? This group over here tended to be students who in their little town in North Carolina where they came from, they were actually the top science student at their high school. They were the top math student at their high school. But now they came to NC State here, and the students they were competing against were from the Durham Math and Science Tech High School they have in Durham. That's a real high-powered high school, and those students enter up here. Both might have come in with the same academic credentials. This group is up here, this group is down here. So when this group encountered failure, you know what they were saying? They get their first test back and had an F on it. They'd look at it and say, I'm used to success. It's going to kick in any minute now. And they would just wait. They wouldn't go to tutoring. They wouldn't get in a study group. You know what that is? Look in the second category. Unrealistic perceptions of your skill level. I write better than I really can. I think I can problem solve better than I really can. I don't need to study as much because, see, students who see themselves successful in other venues, in work, if they're an adult at home, the fluency that students speak with on the street, they think translates into being literate in an academic setting because they can say a rap song just as fast and know every word and all that. I mean, you may laugh at that. But that's exactly what, when students have unrealistic perceptions of their skill level, and there's three things, two of them are up there. Unrealistic perceptions of their skill level, unrealistic perceptions of college, that is, they think this is high school extension. It's going to be a little tougher than high school. Or for a returning adult that's been away a long time, that somehow there's going to be a transfer of skills from job, home, their memories of high school to college. And the third one that's not up there is they have an unrealistic perception of the skills needed to succeed in college. So an unrealistic perception of college is a global one, but an unrealistic perception of the skills they need to succeed in college. They don't know what a metacognitive skill is. Metacognitive skill means students think about how they think. Okay? That when they make errors, they try to look at their errors and see is that a reflection of how they think. That's a metacognitive skill. How confident am I in what I know? That's they don't know what that word means. Okay? That's our responsibility. The retention research says if we combine those two groups, social psychological assessment with cognitive academic assessment, we can predict persistency. We move from 15% up to about 75 to 80% now in terms of our confidence of predicting persistency. Predicting persistence. Do you know why schools don't do that? Because it's a lot of work. That's why they don't do it. See this booklet here? In our first year of college, we do 16 assessments. We do 7 before students ever take a course. Okay? 16 assessments. When we help students make decisions in advising and counseling sessions about course selection, about whether they need to be in study groups, etc., our decisions are based upon self-assessment feedback that students have given us. Therefore, when we sit down to counsel them and we say to students, no, you don't belong in this upper level math course, you belong in this one, they'll say, no, I had advanced count, I could do this. We say, no. The assessments we gave you in which you gave us feedback indicate you're not at the level of being an analytical learner where you can handle this course yet. Now the conversation changes because it's not something we're telling them, it's something they told us. All right? So we've decided we want to invest early on when we meet students in finding out, helping them find out who they are. Do you know that most of the students that come to Mega Everest have no concept of who they are as a learner? No concept. They don't know their learning style. They don't know their preferred learning strategy. They don't know how they process information. They don't know any of that. How do I know that? Because students come to my institution don't know. And they're on the high end. Okay? So we thrust them into a set of courses, and in a given semester, they may be in a course that demands a high degree of reading. Another course might demand writing. Another course might demand fluency because there's a lot of presentations going on. So you're demanding 3 sets of skills that we're assuming they're pretty proficient at, but suppose they aren't. At the end of that semester, they're going to be beaten down. Their academic self-esteem is going to be beaten down. Now we got a different issue here. We've moved from a skill issue to now a psychological issue of them being beaten down academically. And we aren't doing anything intentional, remember that. But if we don't have a model, these are the kind of things that often happen. Again, we all have the same goals. We want students to be self-directed learners. We want students to be more responsible. We want students to increase their work ethic, etc. If students are at stages 1 and 2 of being self-directed learner, notice, stage 1, dependent upon the instructor as an authority figure. Anything the instructor says goes. They don't challenge anything. They don't attempt to be active learners. They're very passive, etc. Stage 2, they get a little better. They respond to efforts to motivate them, etc. Where we really want students to go is to stages 3 and 4 in terms of being self-directed learners. And this is a process. It takes a while. Okay, especially the weaker the student, the less motivated the student, the longer the student's been out of school, etc. You have to have a process to move them to becoming a self-directed learner. It's not going to just happen in a course or seminar. Okay, a model facilitates that because, and so I've invested in a major faculty development effort called Promoting Inquiry-Guided Instruction. We looked around at all the good models of teaching, and we decided that promoting inquiry-guided instruction was one of the ways you can produce a self-directed learner. See, they go hand in hand. We can have a goal or outcome to produce a certain kind of learner, but it's got to be connected to teaching. It's got to be connected to faculty development, okay? And Kofi, I'll send you a copy of that, how the process we went through with that. All right. Again, all I'm saying to you is if this becomes an institutional outcome, that you want to meet students and take them through a process where they become active learners, self-directed learners, work well in groups, collaboratively, there's a plan for that. Say a few things about teaching. When we talk about assessing what we do relative to teaching, teaching excellence, teaching effectiveness, again, we want people to be on the same page. Here are what I feel are 10 of the most fundamental questions that we as instructors can ask ourselves about teaching. Very fundamental stuff. What are your teaching goals in a course? Now, that's not necessarily what's on your syllabus. A syllabus has course objectives. That may not be a teaching goal. That's different. Okay? So one of the course objectives may be for the students to accomplish a certain amount of work, turn a certain paper in, this and that. But that may not be a teaching goal. Okay? How do you execute your goals? Exactly what are your strategies? If in fact you say, I want my students to become critical thinkers or better thinkers, because there's a stage. They don't go from being poor thinkers to critical thinkers in a quantum leap. They go from being poor thinkers to good thinkers to effective thinkers to critical thinkers. So let's say you want to impact thinking. Then what are your strategies? Do your colleagues utilize some of the same strategies? Okay. Do you all compare notes about how it's going? Let's take accounting. Nationally around the country in Accounting 1, there's a high pass rate. In Accounting 2, intermediate accounting, nationally, there's a high failure rate. One follows the other. See, I have difficulty with this. Like I say when I visit campuses. You know, do the people who teach Accounting 1 ever have lunch with the people that teach Accounting 2? Do the people that teach Accounting 1 sit and sip Chardonnay with the people that teach Accounting 2? What's missing here? High pass rate in Accounting 1, high failure rate in Accounting 2. Obviously, some dialogue is not occurring. One of the things we know is that when you move to Accounting 2, it takes a different conceptual approach, a different conceptual emphasis, becomes more abstract, etc. See, different set of goals now. Different set of goals have to occur in Accounting 2 than Accounting 1. What are student learning goals when you meet them?
What's really interesting about that point is sometimes the people which are Accounting 2 also
Yes. He made a point that sometimes the people that teach Accounting 2 are the people that teach Accounting 1. Okay? In smaller schools, that's really true where you don't have larger faculties. So but see, accounting 1, it still happens because it's not necessarily the instructor, it's what the content demands. The difference between the way the content in accounting 1 and accounting 2 are a lot different, which means there have to be different strategies and approaches to the material in accounting, intermediate accounting, than accounting 1. But we get the same outcome whether we have 2 different instructors or the same instructor. We pretty much still get the same outcome. Okay? What do we know about student learning goals when we meet them? What do we know what they're trying to do and accomplish, and how do we know whether it merges with what we want to do, or do we even care? Content-centered instructors do not care about student learning goals. They really don't even care about student learning outcomes. What they care about is they're going to cover 1 chapter every week. And in week 8, they're going to cover chapter 8. Now, half the class, conceptually, may be back on chapter 4 in week 8. But it doesn't matter, because come week 9, they're teaching chapter 9. That's a content-centered instructor. That is not student-centered instruction. Student-centered instruction tries to identify early on, and in the next section on teaching, I'll give you some examples of identifying early on where the students are in your class, and then gauging the teaching to where they are at that particular point. All right? Are students in your department or students in your courses learning what you want them to learn? How do you know? If I have a class and the normal distribution occurs in grading, how do I know the students have learned? All I know is that I got a normal distribution of grading. But how do I know the students have learned? You only know that if you identify learning outcomes and if you identify ways to assess that. So when I taught general psych, I didn't necessarily want to know whether I had a normal distribution. What I wanted to know was, conceptually, do the students understand the difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning? That's what I wanted to know. If they understood that conceptually, then that means they're developing the conceptual skills to understand other kinds of differences between theories, concepts, etc. in psychology. I didn't want to know, did they memorize the concept? Okay. Now, if I bring diversity into this, it doesn't change it. One of the illusions is, around the country is that, if we introduce diversity into this teaching, learning, dialogue, it changes things. No, it doesn't. Notice, the first question stays the same. What are our teaching goals for students? I only added another phrase, who are diverse by age, class, race, skill level, da-da-da-da. Now I'm more specific in my focus. Let's go back to my example at Tacoma Community College. The people at Tacoma Community College who developed the math course for math haters are saying, one of our teaching goals is to take into account the returning adult population who has math anxiety. So our teaching goal will account for age, it'll account for race, it'll account for culture, it'll account for disability. See, that's a very focused teaching goal. Other community colleges don't do that. The instructor comes in with a content-centered goal, could be a class full of returning adults, it doesn't matter. Now they're in a sink or swim mode. I've never read any educational research where a sink or swim model, it's not a model, where a sink or swim approach works. It doesn't. It's dysfunctional. It has nothing to do with effective teaching. Okay? So taking into account the wide range of diversity of learners that come here doesn't change. It's clearly tied to teaching excellence. Actually, it forces our hand. So we have high-powered students that come to NC State, and we have students down on the low end who barely get in. And of the ones who barely get in, there are must for them. That is, we're not letting you into the institution unless you sign this contract that says you're going to do these things. And they come in a particular program. One of the things they must do is they have to go to 2-hour study hall every day. And you figure out where you're going to get the 2 hours in. If you work, then you get it in the morning or in the afternoon. If you can't come in the evening, if you're a residential student, you do it in the evening. But 4 days a week, you come to 2-hour study hall, where we do a lot of these things I'm telling you. Now, they can choose not to do that and not be admitted. Or they can be admitted start doing it and say, I don't want to do it anymore, but then they're bounced out of the support program, which means they're now in courses floating around by themselves, not getting the support they need, and ultimately they'll stop out, drop out, withdraw. And what we're saying is that we have an aspect of student responsibility we have to uphold, but so do you. Let's take 3 areas that I know all the faculty, all the academic support, et cetera, wants to emphasize. Thinking, understanding factual information, asking and answering questions, right? Would you say that most of the faculty here have an agreement about 2 of those 4 areas of thinking as they teach? You think so? Yes, no? Anybody? Yes. Which 2? Just in the thinking part, which of those 2 do you think that when they teach their course content, which of the 2 do you think they're emphasizing?
I would think it's applied thinking and communicating.
Communicating, and what was the other one? Applying and communicating. Does everybody agree? Those of you that teach, is that what you're doing? Because now if you say yeah, my next question is to tell us the specific strategy you use to do that. See, I'm trying to identify is there consensus about certain things. If you have a model, there is. If you have a model, the faculty have come together and they've said, you know, here are a couple aspects of what we want to do. Or let me share a conversation with you with a history professor at NC State when we were pursuing this and talking about why we wanted to develop this faculty development model. I said, we need to develop a model that really emphasizes inquiry-guided instruction so students become inquiry-guided active learners. And this faculty member from history said, well, James, I don't see why we need to invest money in that. All the faculty at NC State teach critical thinking. To which I said, how do you know? I said, why don't you share with us, there was a lot of people in this room, about 300, why don't you share with us the specific strategies you utilize to teach critical thinking? He couldn't do it. You know why? He's a critical thinker. He's a very brilliant man, and he assumed that the act of teaching somehow through osmosis made the students critical thinkers. But in the history department, there had never been a discussion about teaching for critical thinking. Okay? And then he said, you know, I understand what you're saying. He backed off. Let's take facts. Facts is the most fundamental thing. But there are different aspects of learning factual information. Learning factual information is called learning declarative information. You know, you're going to memorize terms, you're going to memorize dates, you're going to write a history course, etc. But we also want students to know how to evaluate facts. That if we give them 2 sets of conflicting information about a topic, we want them to be able to make well-reasoned judgments about those things. Give you a good example. School not too far from here. Keene. Used to be Keene College. Now it's Keene University over in Jersey. K-E-A-N. Several years ago, one of the spokespersons from the Nation of Islam, Khalid Abdul Muhammad, went and gave a talk there. Very biased talk, which led to a lot of upheaval at their institution. You may remember that. And to this day, the residuals of that upheaval still are in the air there. And so I came a couple of weeks afterwards to do a talk about teaching. And of course, somebody asked me a question about that. What did I think about this guy's coming, and what did I think about students now in different camps, and what did I think about faculty and staff who had been friends for 20 years and now hated each other because they took different sides in this fracas? And I said, Khalid Abdul Muhammad is not the issue. The issue is that you have not prepared your students to listen to communications that sit on the ends of continuums, that is ultra-conservative, okay, or ultra-leftist, or wherever they sit. I said, so your students could listen to Rush Limbaugh, or they could listen to Khalid Abdul Muhammad, and they're going to side with who effectively reaches them, or who says a political opinion they like. I said, but what they can't do is evaluate facts, because that's a skill we're supposed to teach them early on. So that when they're reading different things, when they're reading Freudian psychology, and I purposely, in Intro to Psych, would have them look at Freud's views on this ridiculous notion, this pseudo-intellectual notion for which there's never been a shred of research support, called penis envy, that women go through something called penis envy, that women really want one of those things, okay? That Freud made up this concept because he was a misogynist, he was a woman hater, etc. But 18, 19-year-old naive minds around the country take Intro to Psych courses from authority figures they see as instructors, and when the instructor teaches them about penis envy, hey, this must exist. So when I taught Intro to Psych, I would introduce them to penis envy, and I'd go over to the research from the psychology of women and have them read things that counter it, but I had to give them the skills to do it so they could evaluate information. See, in a model of faculty development, you get a consensus about what you want to emphasize. We want students to be good questioners and probers at the bottom. We want students in study groups to get together and not sit there and ask each other questions at the level of rote memory. Because students who operate by rote memory, and a lot of students that come here, their number one learning strategy is rote memory. They try to memorize the math formula. They don't know how to do the math problem conceptually. They try to memorize a lot of things. Therefore, if we give them a test, if the test on the test question says, what are the sleep disorders in adults and children? They'll say, oh, sleep disorders in children are somnambulism, sleepwalking, enuresis, bedwetting, night terror. Sleep disorders in adults are. But suppose I change the question and it says, compare and contrast sleep disorders in adults and children and identify the similarities and differences. Their anxiety level goes up when they read that question. If they don't know that that question now is at a different level of questioning, you know what they do? The 4 sleep disorders in children are, the 4 sleep disorders in adults are. Because they only know how to answer it one way. Guess what? That's not their fault. That's our fault. Because a returning adult coming to Medgar Evers, been out in the work world a long time, been away from school, they don't encounter levels of questioning. They don't know what that concept means. Why would we bring them here, put them in a course, and in that course, every question on the test is at a level other than rote memory, and they've been functioning by rote memory for 25 years. It's our responsibility to introduce them to levels of questioning as part of the expectations of college work. Okay. I'll do one more. I know my time is winding down. Here's another one that has to do with best research, best practices, best models. Look at the programs in the country, 2-year institutions, 4-year, public, private, small, large, doesn't matter. Look at the type of teaching that goes on and says, what are the characteristics of effective teaching in the programs where students have done exceptionally well, students of color, where they've done exceptionally well? Traditional age, non-traditional age, it doesn't matter. For example, there's a program out at South Mountain Community College in Arizona, which started out as a program for young Hispanic mothers, okay, single mothers. And what happened was there were certain activities in that program where they could bring their mothers. Well, the mothers got so interested in the program that they demanded a program start for them, the mothers of the young mothers. And then they began to outperform the young mothers. And now it's one of the top programs in the country for older Hispanic women who, you know, English was a second language, been out of school, don't know anything about college, etc. If we look at that program, if we look at the developmental math program at the University of Texas, okay, the ESP program, which stands for Emerging Scholars Program. And you know, University of Texas, big Research One institution. And at that program, in the ESP program, students start out, come there, mostly black and Hispanic, weak in academic skills, and they start out in the first developmental math course. Now, these are students who want to say, later on in their major, they want to go on into some science or some area where they need a math sequence through calculus. But they're starting out at developmental math, the same one that's taught here. Now, let's compare that group to the students who enter the University of Texas as honors math students. Mostly white, mostly on scholarship, etc. The ESP program, we follow it through 4 years. At the end of 4 years, through the same, now remember, these students here, the honor students, are starting out either in pre-calculus or calculus. This group is starting out in developmental math, so they're 2 to 3 courses away from where this group is starting out. 4 years later, having gone through the same calculus sequence, having taken the same courses, 81% of the ESP students have A's or B's in every one of the math courses through the calculus sequence. 41% of the honor students do. Wait, let me get this right. These students came in on scholarship. These students started out in pre-cal or cal. These are the high-powered students. These students came in, we started in developmental math. They all took the same courses from the same instructors. This group, 81% have A's or B's through the calculus sequence, 41% of this group. In fact, the predominantly white male faculty at the University of Texas has now said, we don't need an honors program in math anymore. The ESP program is the honors program. Now, did you ever think you'd see the day at a Research One institution like Texas where they would say the developmental program should be our honors program? That's how powerful their math model is. I'm just giving you examples. South Mountain, there, others, LaGuardia, where they teach critical thinking. What do they have in common? What they have in common is what you see up there. Okay? They have models of excellent teaching that faculty buy into. Now, if I took the word minority out of the top, what you see up there works for every student under the sun. Every student at every level of any demographic background, because those are characteristics of excellent teaching. Here's the issue. For weaker students, for students who are more diverse, for students who've been out of school a long time, for students who don't understand the culture of college, it's even more imperative that we do these kinds of things. That, for example, as we teach math and science, we make sure that we ask students to express their reasoning processes in their own words. In other words, they express their futility in their own words, not our words. And we don't beat up on them for their futility. We try to use their futility to tell us why they're making mistakes in science, in math, in accounting, in technical abstract courses. That's why writing is so important. All the top math models in the country have a writing component, where as students solve math problems over here on the right in their own words, they write down the reasoning process of how they're solving it. You know why that's important? Because I don't care how good you are as a tutor or a math instructor, if you look at an error on a student's math problem, you can only attempt to identify the mechanics of the error. You don't know their reasoning process. But if you ask them to write it down as they do the problem, you can then look at the mechanics of the error and their reasoning process and say, aha, that's where it occurred. Okay? You ever come across something that sounds so simple to you, you say, how did I miss that all these years? Okay? When I first started looking at programs that do this, I said, that was such common sense. How did I miss that? For all that I know, I missed that one. Okay? That's an investment in faculty development. See, when I go to institution, when I was out at Central Oklahoma and I'm fit, they lose 50% of their freshmen, the first thing I said at a luncheon with the president and all these high-powered people is, I know you don't have a model of teaching and student success here. I know it. There's no way you lose 55, 60% of your freshmen if you have a model of teaching and student success. I said, and what's sadder is that you all sit here every day, every week, every semester, every year, and it doesn't faze y'all. Which means it must not faze the legislature either. Okay? That's beginning model of talking about teaching excellence, how it connects to student success. Now, you know what this means? This is what it translates into. That as I used to teach Intro to Psych, I had to go back and think about how I could take a topic and look down about 4 and you say, introduce the relevancy of the information learned. I had to show students how different concepts I was covering in psychology was relevant to their everyday experience. Now, that's hard in math. It's hard in civil engineering. Until an instructor at NC State decided, oh, I know how to do that. Instead of having them come to class every day and talk about civil engineering, we're not going to meet in class anymore. We're going to spend the whole semester out in the city of Raleigh, North Carolina, and we're going to look at the real world, at how civil engineering works in the real world. And as I show them those things and how it works, I'll introduce the concepts there. See? One change. One change. Students who historically had failed the beginning civil engineering course, now we're getting A's. Because students learn better, returning adults like to go from experience to theory, not theory to experience. That means they like to see the relevancy of the information introduced to them early on as it connects to their experiences. All right, let me stop. And you gonna give them the rest of the directions for the day? Can I take a question or two? Yeah, questions. Yes, sir.
I'm quite fascinated by your presentation, and it's very interesting. What I'd like to know is what percent of the budget, of the institution's budget, you think should be spent for the assessment? Because as you outlined, the assessment how it goes to every course, every department, and every activity of the company. And that itself takes a tremendous amount of time and also requires a tremendous amount of the budget.
Sure.
So I would like to elaborate on that and have some other.
Yeah, I'm not going to give you a figure, but let me give you some parameters. Okay. First of all, you don't have to begin with every department, every faculty member. You begin in the areas where there's the greatest need. Okay. We already know where they are. There are 20 courses at my institution that account for 85% of all course withdrawals. Now, at the start of the fall semester, we may be teaching 800 courses. But 20 account for 85% of the course withdrawals. Further analysis of those 20 showed that 10 had extremely high percentages of C's, D's, and F's. So we're going to start with those 10. And as you might guess, the beginning chemistry, beginning calculus or pre-calculus, beginning psych course, beginning composition course, accounting, those 10. So there are places that you can say, we want to begin, okay? Second aspect of that is there's an undergraduate budget that's separate from the institutional budget. That's part of, but separate from the institutional budget. All of the undergraduate budget goes towards these things I'm talking about, all of it. And it's a change in what you fund. What I fund, for example, I don't fund faculty to go to conferences anymore for their own personal and professional development. I fund faculty to go to conferences who are going to bring something back to change the way something's being taught in that major, in that department, etc. I want faculty to develop professionally, I really do. But their department should fund that, or they should get independent funding or something. I need to fund what's going on in the beginning physics course because there's a high failure rate. Okay, so changing how the allocation of resources occurs. I was down in Alabama not too long ago at a historically black institution, Alabama State. And before I spoke, the provost got up and said, we're going to award $360,000 in faculty development money. We got a big grant, so we have $360,000, which is a lot for an HBCU, an incredible amount. And he said, we're going to, do this. So when I got up to give my talk, I turned to him and I said, Mr. Provost, I hope a significant portion of that $360,000 is going to the things we talk about today, as opposed to being given to individual faculty members who go out and build their name in the field. If you're not the institution that can afford to do that, you can't do that. So the decisions about investing in budget decisions should be on what your priorities are, okay, where the best reallocation, because we're not talking about new money, we're talking about often reallocating money from one area to another that's more significant, et cetera. Or as I saw when I read the Provost newsletter, I saw that you give out the Teaching Center Awards, et cetera. They're going to go to areas that have priorities in terms of beginning to build the model. Now, you may have a department that says, we're not involved in this model building with you. We have our own agenda. They don't get $1 from me. Because if you have your own agenda and you're not part of the train we're on, that means you're getting on another train, on another track, and you can pay your own way. But these are not my decisions. We've come to a consensus about what we want to do among faculty. I see myself to facilitate faculty success. That's my role. I tell them that every day. but it's also my responsibility to bring the information to them to say, here are the best models that we know about. They decided on the inquiry guided instruction model, not me. But I gave them the models to look at.
I have one other question. You indicated in some institutions the difference between teaching and activities in the developmental courses, and then when the students go to the regular college of courses. Now, from your experience, what about those institutions whose faculty are both involved in the teaching of developmental courses as well as the regular courses? Have you find any differences in this?
No, what you find is there's a smoother transition for the students from the developmental courses to the general curriculum courses. But if they aren't, I mean, I can't see how they're not doing that. Let me put it that way. I'm hard-pressed to believe that someone engages in emphasizing certain strategies and approaches to skill building in developmental writing, reading, and math, and then the students take that same person in the general curriculum course and they're not doing it. I don't even fathom why that's occurring. Okay, that's a good model, but if that happens, that person needs support. Other question? Yes.
Regarding content-centered learning and learner-centered learning, I remember that I have attended a week-long workshop on teacher-centered learning and learner-centered learning in Texas. The research showed that learner-centered learning helps the student to develop analytical skills, and they do better in MCAT and GRE test. So how you can compromise between these two, content-centered and learner-centered? Because I found that learner-centered learning is a slower process. We have sequence of courses in each department, and we have a mandate that this course they will learn this much, so that they can go to the next level, can learn that much, and so on. So how we can make that kind of compromise, keeping the content. I want to have finished my syllabus at the same time. I want my students to learn, in addition to asking them to go to tutors.
Sure.
And what are the other strategies?
So the question, if you couldn't hear it in the back, had to do with what's the balance we try to find between content-centered instruction versus student-centered or learner-centered instruction. Given that students have to learn a certain amount of content in certain areas to be successful in other courses later on. First of all, as I said before, there's no evidence in the educational research that solely a focus on content-centered learning is good for all learners. It's good for the high-end learner who's going to get it anyway. Let's be clear on that. What faculty, and this is why you need a faculty development effort, to show faculty, one of the things faculty do when they find this balance is they make decisions about what they're now not going to cover. For example, they don't need to cover terms that could be memorized anymore. When they're finding this balance on producing a more analytical learner, as students become more analytical, they become conceptual learners. And they easily pick up a term. They easily, you don't have to focus on that in the classroom. Where the difficulty comes is for faculty members to sit down and look at their content and say, okay, if I'm going to keep 75% of it, what 75% gives the best yield in the kinds of skills we want students to have? Because the 25% that I'm not going to cover, they'll easily assimilate that into their new scheme of learning. Okay? And it's just finding the balance and getting faculty to agree on the part that they will let go to some degree and let students get through their readings or through their own group work. But where is the true emphasis? For example, and I'll close on this one. There's a concept that I use a lot that has to do with sort of where do students have bottlenecks? In every course, where do they have? Here's how you know. If you want to know whether you're a content-centered instructor or student-centered, here's a quick and dirty test. Can you, at this point in time, identify every bottleneck that occurs in your course for students? And by definition, a bottleneck refers to points where students conceptually don't understand what's going on. Okay? Now, if you're a student-centered instructor, right now, you could say, well, for this course, here are the 7 bottlenecks they usually encounter. For this course, here are the 3 they usually encounter. If you can't do that, then you're content-centered. But You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We already know where the bottlenecks are in the courses. They're the same at every school. Actually, they're the same across learners. We know that in a beginning chemistry course, one of the bottlenecks is molarity. We know in a beginning physics course, it's vectors. We know in a beginning accounting course, it's debits. We know in electrical engineering, it's Ohm's law. We know in psychology that students have difficulty conceptually understanding classical conditioning versus operant conditioning, or the intro to stat when they get to that section, okay? We know across different kinds of courses where the bottlenecks are. Your emphasis in terms of finding the balance is on the bottlenecks, because if they don't negotiate the early bottlenecks, they don't negotiate the later bottlenecks. Okay?
You have example in biology?
In where?
You have example in biology, bottleneck?
Biology, cell division.
Cell division and genetics.
Cell division is one of the early bottlenecks for students. Yeah, we have them for every course. Geology is something called hydraulic flow gradients, the passage of fluids over different surfaces. One of the early. Every course, we know the bottlenecks. Yes?
Staying with the issue of bottlenecks, I think most of us are aware of where those bottlenecks are. The problem,
Let me just say, my experiences across the country show that's not true, that most faculty are not aware from the student perspective.
sir,
Okay?
may I speak for myself?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Rather than say most, let me say, to a great extent, I know where my bottlenecks are.
Good.
Let me tell you what my major problem is. Maybe you covered it earlier. It's not an easy one, particularly for commuter students in urban settings with socio problems, psychological, etc. Time on task. Even if you meet with a student and engage the student in a dialogue around absences, poor performance, these are the issues, not reading the text, and not connecting, or the student may have questions, and then we engage and we talk. It's finding that time. It's beyond time management. It's having enough time for homework, for readings, for class preparations, for identifying for themselves where the problems are. Because the same students will come back 3 or 4 weeks later and will say, I have a classic example, I wrote it down because I need to bring it up in my department meeting. A student has said to me, I have put in a lot of effort, I've put in a lot of time, and you still gave me a D. That's a message I have on my machine. And I know that part of the issue is time on task.
Yes. I did address that. I addressed part of that answer earlier when I talked about students who invest a lot of time in work, in academic work, and because we didn't give them the proper strategies to utilize, that they weren't as successful with that work. Then they get frustrated because they do come to us and say what you just said. But let me say another thing about that. 2 or 3 other things, because this is a very important question for commuter students, for community colleges, for returning adults, it doesn't matter. First of all, a person who comes to this institution as a returning adult, who works, who has a family, who has other exigencies in his or her life, the last thing they need is to have a full load of difficult courses. Okay, whoever advises that person to take a full load of difficult courses needs to be put on probation. Don't fire him outright yet. Give him a chance. Okay? Because we're not here trying to speed them to time to degree. We're here trying to make sure that as they go through the different stages, that they're going to be successful at the stages. So that's the first thing. We got an advising issue for which the advising for that person is different for the advising for a student who's more traditional, has more time.
Absolutely.
Yet if you have an advisor that gives them the same advising feedback, that's dysfunctional advising. That means there's not a model occurring here. That's one aspect. Second aspect of it is, when we identify that student, and we identify, when you sit down to make out an academic plan with that student for the next couple semesters, that academic plan accounts for those things in terms of type of courses, type of academic support, type of strategies we probably need to give that student. See, that's why at Tacoma Community College, the students who take the returning adults that take the Math for Math Haters course are so into it, they find times to meet on their own on Saturdays or Sundays at people's houses. See, they make the time because now they're more invested because they're witnessing success throughout the course. Students who are in a traditional course taught by a content-centered instructor don't even connect with each other, okay, at all. And so they begin to be divorced emotionally from the course. So the only point I'm making is it's an advising issue, it's a tutoring issue, it's a student problem-solving issue. It's a lot of things, but it all falls into developing an academic plan tailored to that student's time, the exigencies in their life, etc. Now, you got to understand that open admissions institutions have students who come to them who are so far away from being ready for college work and who have exigencies in their life, okay, that they're not going to be successful. Every student that comes here or to my institution is not going to be successful. Not everyone. They may be motivated to be highly successful, but there may be some things they need to do first. All right? Now, are you going to take the time to invest in that student and take it away from somebody else? See, those are the tough decisions you make. Just like I'm setting up these partnerships with 10 community colleges in North Carolina to make sure that the transfers that come to us are more successful, because they haven't been as successful to date. They do all the right coursework, but they get there and they're not successful. Now, what that means is the faculty at my campus and the faculties at these community colleges have to have this tough dialogue about what's going to make this work. I'll fund it, but they have to commit to it. Just like at Medgar Evers, you have to commit. You have a profile of who that population is you just described. You know who they are. When they first meet an advisor or a faculty member, everybody ought to be on the same page about the stages that we're going to take them through. You shouldn't have people coming here in the profile you just described, and every one of them is getting a different treatment or no treatment at all. That shouldn't happen, because that's the profile of the student who is most at risk. Okay.
Well, those who aren't here, you can tell them they really missed something, right? We had on the schedule a break. In order to maximize the time, because we started a little late, I would propose that we stand and stretch, stay in the room. We're not going to bar the door, but just stand up, stretch, and then we'll come back and follow up with the presentation for this morning. Stand and stretch.
Very much interested if you can get his ears
Ask him that after the.
Yeah, I'm going to leave them with her. Yeah. Okay. I'll leave a packet with her and then she can.
Because I know I can. I just say one
thing. One is Aston's book on what matters in college. But a second one is the book by Cross and Angelo on classroom assessment, which give faculty quick and dirty techniques that they can use in their class to periodically assess where students are in terms of their learning, their skill levels, etc. Classroom assessment by Cross and Angelo, Pat Cross and Tom Angelo. And then in terms of student success and retention, Alexander Aston's book on what matters in college. It's in its second edition now.
What matters in college was again?
Alexander Aston, A-S-T-I-N. And another book related to that one, they kind of sound the same, is How College Affects Students. And that's by Pascarella and Terenzini. If you remember the book, don't worry about the name. Aston's book is Josie Bass, is the press. But How College Affects Students by Pascarella, spelled just like it sounds, Pascarella and Terenzini. And both Aston's book and Pascarella's book summarize the last 40 years of research on student success and retention. You read those two, you don't need to read another thing. All right, so we have that first category of faculty not determining student problems until it's too late. Now, individual faculty may have idiosyncratic ways that they use to try to determine student difficulty. But there are also ways that we can do it that there might be a consensus across faculty that this might be a good way. You know, in that book, for example, they make reference to the 1-minute paper, which is about the simplest thing that you can do. At the end of every lecture or lab period, you leave 5 minutes or so and you ask students to write down where was the greatest difficulty you had in this, what did you understand the most, what's the muddiest point, and then you build the next lecture around looking at those responses, etc. Okay. Second category has to do with not being able to determine problems, but how do we provide feedback to students when they ask questions, when they make errors, etc. The Writing Across the Curriculum research did a big study and looked at the kind of feedback that faculty give to students in different courses, and here's what it said. 90% of the feedback that faculty give to students across institutions is based on the error and not the student, and it focuses on what they did wrong, okay, as opposed to pointing the direction for success. 90% of the feedback that we give to students focuses on the error and not the student, and literally beats them up for making the error. So the issue then is, what is appropriate feedback? What kind of feedback can we give to students that by sitting with them and going over the error, you shift the focus from them making an error to them as a learner? In other words, you use the error to show them what kind of learner you want them to become. Okay. Third category is that as we teach our content, and I mentioned this, we don't facilitate other skills. So if you're in biology and you know you're teaching a course where the material, some of it involves learning terminology in biology, some of it involves learning theory, some of it involves learning concepts, some of it involves comparative kind of work, etc. What does that mean in terms of the kind of cognitive skills they need to be successful? And then, how do you know they have them or don't have them right at the start? And if they don't have them, then what does that say to you? And then the fourth category is that we don't vary or alter our approach to teaching content when the feedback we get about students suggests that we should do so. One of the things I dislike about higher ed is sometimes it doesn't function like businesses do. IBM is not going to let an employee or manager sit there and lose money semester after semester after, well, I say semester, quarter after quarter after quarter. IBM is not going to let that happen. We tolerate high failure rates in courses semester after semester after semester. Now, I don't understand that because, again, we have the best research, best practices, and best models about good teaching. Good teaching for different populations, good teaching connected to diversity. We have the best models, best research, etc., about academic supports in their relationship to good teaching. So why would we reward faculty semester after semester after semester for poor teaching? Even if the instructor would use the excuse, well, it's the quality of the student that comes here, I can find an institution with the same kind of student, and it's the same kind of institution in the country that's very successful. So anytime someone wants to say to me, well, students aren't successful here in developmental math, I say, you need to go look at the ESP program at the University of Texas, because they're smoking down there. All right? They mentioned something to me about Hispanics. So you need to go to South Mountain. You need to go to this place. You need to go to Tacoma. All right? So a faculty development model emphasizes faculty excellence by, first of all, being willing to say, we want to invest in where we're having difficulty. Just like I said, those 10 courses at NC State that account for a significant number of C's, D's, and F's and course withdrawals, I had to be very careful as I approached those departments and those faculty to not imply that you're just doing a pitiful job here, but in fact to approach them in a way that suggested, we know there are difficulties in teaching, the beginning physics course, as there are around the country. We know there are difficulties teaching this accounting course, or economics is another, intro to economics. We know that there are difficulties. What we want to do is try to support you in terms of being able to kind of turn around the outcomes that are occurring now. And then we find a lot of willingness to do that. If there's resistance, we actually have people who start talking to us about academic freedom. And we say, well, academic freedom is tied to responsibility. Academic freedom does not exist without responsibility. Academic freedom doesn't mean you teach any way you want and get any outcome you want. Academic freedom exists within a framework of what we're trying to accomplish at the institution, and that is how we approach that. So, those are 4 areas. The reason I mention that is to say to you, you can't approach all these 4 areas at the same time. So you have to decide where you want to lay your chips. But you can do it in a stage development process as you go through this kind of effort. Remember, I made reference a couple times to the notion that students, especially returning adults, been out of school a long time, they don't really understand the culture of college. The culture of college is like the word culture that we define in sociology. There are values associated with it. There's certain kinds of expectations and behavior, and there's a socialization process into the culture. See, it would be a lot easier for you all to do what you want to do if you had a lot of residential students. You know why? Because they're here all the time. And you could socialize them into the process easier. So when you have commuting students, you have to have a model that capitalizes on what you see as the time they have, the abilities they have, etc. Let me give you a quick example. Bakersfield College, which is really Bakersfield Community College, but they call it Bakersfield. So I was out there a couple years ago, and we had this same kind of day and a half presentation, interaction with faculty and staff. And I asked them, what do you see as the #1 transitional issue here at Bakersfield for students? In other words, what factor, transitional factor, do you think accounts for the greatest difficulty for students? Guess what it was? Commuting. Okay, I thought they were going to say something else, but it was commuting. They say on the average our students commute 1.5 to 2 hours to Bakersfield. I said, fine. Let's talk about how we're going to now use commuting as a strategy in the model that we're going to build out here. Well, they looked at me. They said, we can't shorten the commute. I said, no, that's not the issue. The issue is, what can we do in that commuting time? Because if they're coming 1.5 hours and going 1.5 hours, that's 3 hours in a day that they're not doing something else. And they're a captive audience. That was the key thing. They're a captive audience. I said, why don't we make a slew of cheap audio tapes that are connected to particular courses they're having difficulty with, that are connected to the kinds of learning strategies that we're emphasizing, and as they commute back and forth, they'll listen to these audio tapes. And to make sure they listen to them, the audio tapes will be built in as part of the coursework, etc. They thought that was brilliant. That was common sense to me. Whatever you identify as Medgar Evers, if you come together and say, just like the sister, I was going to point to you in the back, but you're over here now, just like she said, I identify this as one of the significant transitional issues, whatever you identify then becomes a focal point for how you are going to choose to establish a model or develop strategies. So the issue isn't so much the full load. We know students have to take 12 hours for financial aid. It's what goes on in those 12 hours. And that's based upon where they are when you meet them. Not that, this is why I was so ticked off at Lansing Community College, is that when they let students come and check off the nursing box, they then give them 12 hours of courses that begin the nursing curriculum. And as I said, if they're reading at the 7th, 8th, 9th grade level, they're doomed. They're not going to pass any of those 12 hours, which really now makes financial aid a moot point, because you now flunking out, all right? Versus saying, all right, you want to be in a nursing curriculum, but we've assessed you and we identified areas of weakness. We're going to give you a first semester of the following. None of the tough nursing courses, none, zilch. They need a semester to begin to be weaned into that. But still, we make it 12 hours that will get them their financial aid and that will begin to direct them towards what they want to accomplish. Okay? A second issue is introducing students to the classroom culture right away. Having them understand the dynamics, the expectations, clarifying, as that says, understanding what the class will and won't do as soon as possible. Okay. What are the dictates of this class? How are we going to approach it? What skills do you need to emphasize? Are we going to do group work or aren't we? If we do group work, what does that mean? Is the group work part of a grading process? If so, what is the participation of each group member relative to the grading process? Say all the specifics. That it should never occur in a course that when a student gets a grade, if they're not satisfied, they can make a lot of complaints, but there's one they shouldn't make, and that is, I didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't know you were going to do this. That should never happen at the end of the course, because we should introduce them to all of the expectations of the course, even give them examples of the kind of skill level you expect them to operate at. So, those of you that were here this morning, you remember I gave you the example from my Intro to Psych course. I'm going to use the content of psychology to teach you a set of skills, because most of you are taking this as electives. And the skills I choose are ones that can be used across courses. And in my first lecture, I give them an example. At the end of the first lecture, I save about 10, 15 minutes, and then I say, all right, I've just finished the first lecture. Tell me what 5 categories all the material that I covered fall into. You all sat there and took notes. Tell me, by the way, my first lecture is on sleep and dreams in Intro to Psych, because I pick something they do every day. See, relevancy of information. I'm not going to pick statistics and research methods as my first lecture. I'm not going to pick brain and behavior or visual perception, which are some of the drier areas of Intro to Psych. I'm going to pick something they do every day, sleep and dreams. So they get all buzzed up about it, you know. But at the end, I say, all right, I've given you this lecture. What are the 5 categories it broke down into? See, they just look at me. And I do that on purpose. I want to make the point to them that part of developing thinking schemes is being able to package information in categories. Why? Because when I give you that first test, let's say there are 800 items to learn. If you use the big bin theory of learning, that means you just dump the 800 items into the big bin to be memorized. Every time you look at a question on a test, people that use the big bin theory have to scan the big bin for the answer. You scan 800 items. You do it fast, but you still scan 800 items. If we showed students how to use a simple technique in memory, which is retrieval cues, you set up your categories of learning, and you have a retrieval cue at the top of each category. So my first lecture actually broke down into historical reasons for dreaming, the physiology of sleep and dreams, the stages they go through, sleep disorders in adults and children, another category. It broke out into a neat 5. When I write them up on the board what those 5 were, they sit there and say, oh yeah, I see it now. Notice what I just did. In the first lecture, I've already said, here's one of the expectations about how I expect you to take notes, and also how you need to begin to develop a memory system so that if in the first exam you see a question that says identify or compare and contrast sleep disorders in adults and children, you don't go to any of the categories in your memory system other than the category that's sleep disorders, and it might be 50 items in there. And that's all you have to scan other than 800. You know what? What I just described to you, every faculty member at every institution in the country can do. Teaching students how to use retrieval cues is one of the easiest things that you can do. It's not complex, it's not difficult, and you give them practice. Notice, I connected it to note-taking. You could actually teach it, just teach it as is without doing that. But if you connect it to classwork, they get it a lot better. Then I would actually have them before every test, several weeks before every test, they start reviewing each other's notes to see how another student set up their notes in terms of categories of learning. Now they get into a collaborative kind of thing. Another aspect of learning to participate in the classroom culture is assessing the nature of classroom discussion. Type of discussion, is it rewarded, is it not rewarded? For the student that sits there the whole semester as an introvert, What's the payoff for doing that? At my institution, for a lot of courses, it's no problem because there are 500 students in the course. You sit there as an introvert, it doesn't matter. Nobody's getting points for participation. But in smaller classes where there's an expectation of participation for a reward or for learning, that's even more important. If they are introverted in a course where the strategies that you're using are going to promote learning and they don't participate, they're not going to learn. Okay. But all of this is made clear to the students and constantly reinforced. And then one down here at the bottom that I mentioned earlier is introducing students to metacognition. Metacognition is something that everybody in this room does well. You know why? Because we're real good at this higher ed thing. That's why we got where we are. We can't take for granted students understand thinking about how they think. Am I using the right thinking processes? Do I think in a way that's not going to lead to what I want, the outcomes I want? How confident am I about my own learning? Do I have the ability to identify bottlenecks? Okay? Students who don't know anything about bottlenecks, students who are not self-directed learners, think about this. When they study and they read chapters, when they come across a concept that they don't know that's a bottleneck, they just read right past it. Just keep on reading. When you cover something and they don't understand is a bottleneck, they just go right on. Okay? Which means that now they probably won't negotiate the next bottleneck well or the next bottleneck well. And it's a cumulative deficit that's occurring. Okay? Most of the students that come to Mega Everest don't know a thing about metacognition. That's our responsibility up front to introduce what that is. In other words, here's another way of looking. When you give your test back to students, what do? Somebody tell me what they do. Look at the grade. You may explain something a lot of people got wrong, etc. Okay? Now, in doing that, you think that makes an indentation in the bottleneck in their conceptually understanding or not understanding something? No. The greatest indentation we can make on a bottleneck is when students talk to each other about their errors. The research backs that up. When we create a learning environment where students talk to each other about their errors, because they're hearing it from people with learning styles similar to themselves. We're analytical learners. A lot of times it's difficult for us to drop down to the level of abstraction, which is often very concrete for students, to explain something. But a combination of our explanation and their peers often promote, that's why SI works so well. When supplemental instruction works right, it works every time, every kind of institution, because it's peer collaborative feedback and peer collaborative learning. Okay. Now let me give you some techniques that work this afternoon, tomorrow, next week, etc. And I picked a couple that are so fundamental that they're important for every discipline. And I've made reference to a couple of them in the other overheads. Let's talk about questions, level of questions. The bulk of students who come to open admissions institutions or relatively open admissions institutions ask and answer questions at these two levels, the level of rote memory or lower levels of comprehension. And they do okay in classes where that's the emphasis. So notice, they like to get tests that say, name this, list this, recall this, what are the 5 characteristics of this, what are the 3 sleep disorders in adults, what are the three sleep disorders in children, what are the stages of cell division, describe the stages of cell division, etc. And they do okay in that. But in my institution, entering undergraduate, in the course of the time they're there, 10% of the tests that they take will have questions in these two categories. Only 10%. Now, why should we expect at an open admissions institution that students come to us with the ability to ask and answer questions at the level of application, which is what science does, or what when you take students from a lecture to a lab? Now you get that. Or at the toughest 3 levels for them, which are the levels of analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. See, when I asked the question, when I went from saying, what are the sleep disorders in adults and sleep disorders in children, which is at the level of rote memory, to compare and contrast sleep disorders in adults and children and identify their similarities and their differences. Now I've ratcheted it up. I've moved to other levels of questioning. Am I asking students to take something and synthesize bits of information into an answer? Am I asking students to take something global, a global concept, and analyze it in its disparate parts? Am I asking students to make evaluative judgments about two things that might have happened? So I might get to personality theory, and I might ask students to discuss the aspects of Freudian theory as opposed to behavioristic theory concerning something. So I'm asking them to make an evaluative judgment. Folks, where would they learn to do that other than from us? At an open admissions institution, as returning adults that have been out of school, it's not on TV, it's not in their job, it's not happening at the dinner table. Where is it going to happen? And here's what infuriates me, is that we allow students to come to the institution, put them in courses, and this is what their first sets of tests are doing. Asking them questions at levels we already know they're not there. Why are we penalizing them? Somebody show me in the educational research where that is a functional model. It's not. It's the way we do business. That's all it is, the way we do business. We have 59 community colleges in North Carolina, which is a lot because we got a lot of schools. North Carolina is one of them states with a lot of schools. In and around Raleigh, we have 15 two-year or four-year institutions, okay? So I go to one community college way out in the western part of North Carolina, not even around an urban area, named Isothermal. And it's actually named that because of the thermal belts of weather. And they had invited me out, and they said, James, we want to be the premier community college in North Carolina. I said, are you really serious? I said, what does that mean? And for them, it meant that they aren't going to do things anymore that are the old way of doing business, letting students come, getting courses, take a swim. They said, you know, we're failing our students. We're being unethical. We're this, we're that, we're that. See, to me, that's an institution that's ready to move towards a model, to move towards a sense of responsibility, to maximize what they're doing. We're writing a big grant now with them to FIPSI to hopefully now be able to get more monies to do what we're doing. My point is that if we know that students come and they don't have these sets of skills, a priori, then why the hell are we putting them in courses where the demand in terms of learning and the responses on tests are for levels of questioning? The instructor is covering the content, not covering the content and teaching levels of questioning. Why are we doing that? Because we haven't thought about what we're doing. All right? And you just make the decision to stop. That's it. You just make the decision to stop doing it. That's a fundamental skill that is needed in every single course. Now understand where this skill operates. You're giving a lecture, a student raises his or her hand and asks you a question because they got a bottleneck, right? Dr. Anderson, I don't understand the difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning. I don't understand what you're saying. I give an answer to the way they ask the question. I'll say, is that the answer that you want? They say, no. If they're only operating at the level of rote memory, but their real difficulty is at the level of synthesis, they don't know how to tell you in question form that their difficulty is at the level of synthesis. They only know how to say it at the level of rote memory. So the first difficulty, and the reason this is so important, is just when they need to ask you questions because they have bottlenecks, they fail to understand, they need to know how to ask questions at different levels. Second thing is when they sit and study for a test, the students who will do better on tests are students who anticipate test questions. Okay? If they're only operating at the level of rote memory, they can sit there for 2 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 30 hours, and they're not going to anticipate questions at the level of synthesis and evaluation because they can't. Then they come in and get a test and they sit there and look at it, because 90% of the questions are at a level they can't do. So now, asking and answering questions in class, trying to anticipate test questions when they study, getting together in groups and asking questions of each other. If they all are at the level of rote memory, they all sit there and ask each other questions at the level of rote memory. And you know what? They feel real good, because all of them are answering each other and they got all the information down at the level of rote memory. Then they come out of the test and say, man, that dude is asking unfair questions, because it's at a level they weren't aware of and they didn't practice. Now, where do you do that? For the most success, you do it at every venue. You do it in the academic support area. You do it in the developmental courses. You do it in the intro general curriculum courses, etc. I put this in the hands of the students the first day I met them, when I was teaching intro courses. First day I meet them, I put this in their hands. I talk about what it